Jukido is a unique system of jujitsu in today's modern world. Strangely enough, it is unique because it continues to hold on stubbornly to the historic telos, or purpose for existing. Many highly skilled martial artists globally practice the art of jujitsu today. However, most of these practitioners practice forms of the art that are now divorced from its original and intended purpose. Many jujitsuka of the modern era say that this is due to the art's natural evolution. Things change and evolve over time. In some ways, we as Jukidoka couldn't agree more. However, the distinction that we as Jukidoka make is that although things do evolve and we don't want to stay stuck in the past, our perspective is that evolution shouldn't move us away from the purpose of the art's actual existence. We can evolve in the direction of further refinement. We can evolve in the direction of developing strategies and tactics that address the needs of the modern world. But the point is, we continue to evolve in the same direction as opposed to taking a different direction altogether. Lifelong marriage evolves over time. It of course evolves and matures as time passes. Experience and lessons learned build the tradition, the fabric of marriage. Hopefully, despite ups and downs, a particular marriage strengthens over time. The individuals in the marriage remain committed to the telos, or the established values that brought that union together to begin with. The central purpose for the union's existence remains unchanged. In fact, it is timeless. The purpose of marriage is so timeless that it isn't restricted to any particular marital relationship. The concept of marriage is almost as old as man himself. The concept of marriage outlasts the lifespan of any individual marital union. There is something in the essence of the concept of marriage itself that makes it, well, marriage. The individuals in a particular marriage are rightly bound by the timeless requirements of ultimate fidelity to this grander purpose, undergirding what we call marriage. When the purpose is no longer clear, or the marriage is no longer unified in the direction of that purpose, when fidelity to the concept of marriage and each other breaks down, well, that marriage continues to move forward in time, but as it moves and evolves forward in time, it is moving forward in a completely different direction altogether. It is doing so in a way that will see the marriage be a marriage only in name. There is a breakdown in the fidelity to the telos of that marriage, and of marriage itself. Eventually, if enough of this so-called evolution takes place, the parties will no longer be unified in purpose. They separate, they divorce. Their effort at marriage ends. But the timeless concept of marriage remains, and it remains true. Shihanarel's vision for his jujitsu system, Jukido, was that it would be a Gendai Budo, or modern martial art. A system of jujitsu that would evolve, but that evolved in the same direction that the art was founded on, built on the premise of its founding. It would remain wed to its telos. He and a few of his generation were among the first to recognize that the art they loved was evolving, but it was evolving by going in a different direction, away from its original purpose. Jukido retains the two broad overarching assumptions, or premises, of the classical Japanese art of jujitsu. If we, as modern-day Jukidoka, never abandon these two assumptions, we will never lose our way. These two assumptions undergird Jiu-jitsu as a whole and our Jiu-jitsu today in particular. If we keep them as the most pressing priorities in our practice and teaching of the art, we will absolutely ensure that the art of Jiu-jitsu is both preserved at its core and can be further developed forward for future generations without divorcing ourselves from the art's purpose for existing. The obsession with these two assumptions will ensure that no divorce takes place between the purpose and the practice of our Jiu-jitsu. The two overarching assumptions are actually quite simple. First, we assume that the art is designed for contemporary, real-world combative encounters. We train on a mat, but we don't train for the mat. We train in a dojo, but not for the dojo. That is to say, real combat happens in real places with very real consequences. Whether it was a battlefield in feudal Japan, or it's the tricky situations a modern police officer faces, or the civilian self-defense needs of the young and old, men and women alike. The first assumption is that we are training in Jiu-jitsu to prepare us for a truly real combative encounter. The second assumption is that we find ourselves in this real-world combative encounter. When we do find ourselves there, we are the party in the circumstance with the physical attribute disadvantage. The attacker might be bigger, stronger, younger, fitter, meaner. Perhaps they are armed. Perhaps their advantage lies in numbers or the element of surprise. Whatever the case might be, we are going to start with the premise or the assumption that we will not be the one with the physical attributes on our side. We assume and prepare for the reality that it will not be a fair fight. If we happen to be wrong, we'll take it. But we will engage all of our training efforts with the baseline assumption that we are the smaller, weaker, or otherwise disadvantaged party with respect to physical attributes. These two assumptions have massive implications to training. Two of them, in fact. They again undergird the marriage in Jiu-jitsu between the art's purpose and the practice of the art. The first implication is the concept of kanzen, or combative completeness. Because we aren't preparing for a particular singular environment, rule set, opponent, or circumstances, we must prepare for the realities in a way that is holistic, comprehensive. The Jujitsuka needs to be incredibly technically diverse. Combative skills must include striking, throwing, grappling, and they must do so in an integrated way. These comprehensive fighting skills must be applied in a variety of environments, ranges, and circumstances. The Jujitsuka must be versatile and adaptable enough to control an unruly individual without any damage being done, or to take someone's life from them if the situation was severe enough and warranted it. The Jujitsuka must be complete in their physical conditioning and training, but also in their mental perspective, ensuring that they are situationally aware, resolute under pressure, and infused with the courage to act if and when appropriate. Because we don't know what situation we'll precisely face, we can't put all of our eggs in a particular combative basket. We don't have the luxury of hyper-specialization and a favorite subset of combative skills because we know in advance that those skills are the ones that will be required. We must aim for both width and depth of combative capabilities. We must be complete. We must have kanzen. The second of these two implications is adherence to the principle of ju. Often ju is physically manifest in concepts such as kuzushi, or the breaking of balance. Because we won't be the bigger, stronger, fitter person in our encounter, we need a guiding principle that centers around using the physical advantages of our adversary against them. To adapt, to flex, and to give way in order to not be immediately overtaken by an attacker who happens to be rich in physical attributes. We must remain 100% loyal, faithful, and committed to this concept. If not, we lose the very ju in the art of ju-jitsu. The art is named after this very concept. Our style of the art, Jukido, also contains the principle of ju. It is at the very heart of what we do. As we both preserve and evolve, we can ensure that we move forward in the right direction by never straying from the original purpose and assumptions of jujitsu. By maintaining complete and unwavering allegiance to the two assumptions embedded at the core of the art and the two resultant guiding principles, we ensure that our jujitsu, the Jukido system of jujitsu, is safe from the state of divorce found by many of our cousins in the modern jujitsu scene. Any keen observer of martial arts history can see that separation from these two guiding principles eventually takes the art in a totally different direction. It doesn't happen in a day, of course, but as little as in a decade or two, the entire character of the art changes when one or both of these assumptions is lost in the practice of the art. Although there are so many examples, including the very popular modern sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, let us focus on one prime example. Let's focus on the so-called evolution of modern Olympic-style Judo. Judo, at its origin, was another system of Jiu-Jitsu. Over time, this modernized form of Jiu-Jitsu, the brainchild of the legendary genius Jigoro Kano, became, in a sense, the mecca of Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. In its original form, until approximately World War II, Judo was strict in its complete adherence to the two assumptions we discussed. Yes, it did emphasize physical and moral education as well. Yes, it had a contest component that was emphasized as another form of training. But contest judo was not the point of training itself. As any reading of early judo history will recount, judo proved its effectiveness many times over in the fire of real combative encounters. After World War II, major segments of judo drifted away from the first of the two assumptions. Again, the assumption that the art was going to be used in real-life environments and in real-life combative encounters. Over a relatively short period of time, the sport side almost entirely swallowed up the rest of judo. Now, contest judo wasn't a form of training, it became the entire purpose for training altogether. With this reality, judoka moved away from any form of training that didn't directly translate to success in contests on the judo mat. Training on the mat for the realities of matted contests became the goal. Slowly, the emphasis on self-defense went away, and the striking elements of judo along with it. As the rules became more and more restrictive, so did the skill set of the competitive judoka. The hyper-specialization in particular aspects of the Japanese art led to the slow decline of any area not relevant for sportive contests. The lack of preservation of the first assumption as a central focus real-world combat or self-defense, was in large part what created the modern sport of judo. What is interesting, however, is that for a very long time, judo as a whole did not lose the second assumption. They were completely obsessed with the second assumption, in fact. This is evidenced by the fact that from its founding in 1882 until approximately 1956, even in contests, there were absolutely no weight classes. The smallest and weakest judoka in a tournament could well face the strongest, largest, and heaviest contestant. As such, the judoka always trained with the second assumption in mind. He trained assuming that his opponent, albeit an opponent in a sport of context, would have the physical attributes on his side, or at least that at some point in a tournament he would be facing multiple people that would have greater physical attributes than he. As such, he devoted himself fully to developing his skills in accordance to the principles of Ju. Many of judo's great legends were some of these small men who defeated skilled giants using an uncanny understanding and mastery of kuzushi. However, modern sport judo eventually lost that second assumption as well. Slowly, over a period of years, weight classes were introduced. At first, it was 2 large weight categories. Then it became 4. Today, there are 7 major weight categories. The introduction of weight classes marked the beginning of the end of the second core jujitsu assumption. Long past are the days that modern Olympic judoka will assume that he's facing someone physically larger and stronger. At this point, he rightfully assumes that he'll face competitors around his same weight. In fact, he'll even cut weight like boxers, wrestlers, and MMA fighters in an attempt to be the biggest, strongest athlete in his particular weight category. If he thinks he can get an advantage by cutting a few pounds and going into a lower weight class to be the bigger man, he'll do exactly that. He now strongly emphasizes weight training in hopes that he'll match his opponent's muscle fiber for muscle fiber. If he is lucky and trains hard enough and bulks up, he could well be the biggest and strongest athlete in his weight class. Under these conditions, that is the approach that is incentivized by the modern sport of judo. As a result, most modern judoka have lost both of the 2 assumptions of the historic jujitsu. A few hang on to one of those 2 assumptions, and almost no modern judoka hang on tightly with complete fidelity to both of the original assumptions of jujitsu. Judo is one prime example from history, but it is far from being the only one. So, as the sands of time pass by, as the present slowly becomes the past, as we train today and pass on the art to the future masters that today perhaps wear a humble white belt, we must never divorce ourselves from the 2 classic assumptions of our beloved martial art. If we maintain these 2 assumptions and train with the 2 resultant principles of Kanzen and Ju in mind, Jukido Jujitsu will evolve forward, forever strong and in the right direction.